All right, folks, gather around because Bandit here is about to break it down in classic trash talk style. And today, we're talking about a country that's quite literally in the dark Cuba. No, I'm not talking about metaphors or living in the shadows kind of dark. I mean candles and flashlights to find your way to the fridge kind of dark. Let's dive into the drama. So, what's going down in Cuba? Imagine this an entire nation where the power grid has collapsed not once, not twice, but four current times in 48 hours. See, it's like the lights keep flickering on just long enough for you to find your way to the bathroom, and then, boom, darkness again. It's a mess. You've got people banging pots and pans in protest, because if you can't see, you might as well make some noise, right? Let's think about that for a second. An entire country of over 10 million people stumbling around in the dark. Cubans are out there using flashlights to get by. Food is spoiling, medicine is running low, and water is in short supply. Water. You know it's bad when people can't even get clean drinking water. But let's break down the bigger issue. Cuba's energy infrastructure is so ancient, it makes your grandpa's old TV set look modern. We're talking decades-old power plants. And they're running on crude oil. And no, not the kind of fancy refined oil that makes your car purr like a kitten. This is the rough, sticky stuff that gums up the machinery and barely gets the job done. Cuba's running on fumes, and the whole system is crumbling faster than my last relationship. Now, how did it get this bad? For one, Venezuela was supposed to be Cuba's energy buddy, supplying oil to keep things going. But guess what? Venezuela's got its own blackout problems. They're over there lighting candles like it's the 1800s. And when you think about it, how can you expect someone else to help you when their house is also falling apart? So, Venezuela's oil exports are way down, like 33% lower than last year. And whatever they are shipping, they're sending to countries that can actually afford to pay up. And Cuba? Well, they're not exactly rolling in cash. Then you've got Mexico, another potential oil source, but they're facing 45-year production lows. The last time Mexico's oil production was this low, people were listening to disco on their Walkmans. And Russia? Don't even get me started. With Russia neck-deep in the Ukraine conflict, they aren't exactly worried about Cuba's lights going out. To them, Cuba is way down on the priority list. Let's not forget the elephant in the room. The U.S. trade embargo. Yep, the one that's been in place for over 60 years. Cuban officials are quick to point out that this embargo has kept them from getting the supplies and replacement parts they need to keep their system from falling apart. But here's a question for you. Should one embargo really be able to cripple an entire country's infrastructure like this? Or is this just one of the many problems? And before we move on, let's address a deeper question. Are Cubans being left in the dark, literally and figuratively, by their own government? Now here's the kicker. In the midst of all this, people are protesting, but we don't know how widespread it is because it's hard to verify the videos. I mean, you can't even trust your cousin's Instagram these days, let alone protest footage from halfway across the world. But the situation is bad enough that Cuba's president came on TV dressed in military gear, trying to look like a boss. But we all know a uniform doesn't keep the lights on. And there's a haunting quote from someone in Havana, telling the TNN New York Times that Cubans are like an island of zombies staggering around with no idea where to go. Whew, that line hits hard, doesn't it? It makes you think about what happens when a whole nation is forced to live like this, disconnected from the modern world, isolated, and literally stumbling around in the dark. So, what's driving this behavior? Well, think about it. When people are desperate and they can't meet their basic needs, electricity, food, water, they're going to do whatever they can to make some noise. Humans are social creatures, and when pushed to the brink, we revert to primal behaviors. The banging of pots and pans in Cuba is a simple but powerful protest. It's a collective shout for help, a way to say, we're not okay. But here's the thing. How long can people live like this before they snap? I'm talking real social breakdown. At what point does the government lose control and the people take to the streets en masse? Is there a tipping point where desperation turns into revolution? Looking at this from a global perspective, The situation in Cuba highlights a troubling trend we're seeing in other countries with decaying infrastructures. Whether it's Venezuela, parts of Africa, or even here in the US, with our own power grids in places like Texas, we're seeing the consequences of neglecting essential infrastructure. We've built systems that worked for decades, but they weren't built to last forever. And now, with climate change, political unrest, and economic instability, these systems are crumbling faster than anyone expected. And speaking of climate change, here comes Hurricane Oscar, rolling in just to make things worse. It's like life decided to kick Cuba while it's down. But how many times have we seen this before? Natural disasters tend to hit the hardest in places that are already struggling. Puerto Rico, Haiti, now Cuba. It's almost like nature knows who's on the ropes. How much responsibility should the Cuban government bear for this crisis? Is it entirely the result of the US embargo? Or is there something more at play here? Do you think protests like banging pots and pans can actually lead to change? Or is it just a way for people to vent their frustrations without any real results? Could what's happening in Cuba be a warning for other nations with failing infrastructures? Are we all just one natural disaster away from living in the dark? So, what's the takeaway here? Cuba's power crisis isn't just about flickering lights, it's a warning sign. It's about what happens when governments, economies, and infrastructures fall apart. It's about the resilience of people, but also about how much more they can take before they break. And hey, if you think this could never happen where you live, think again. We've seen what happens when the grid fails, when governments get caught slipping, and when people are pushed to their limits. Whether it's Cuba, Venezuela, or even Texas during a winter storm, the cracks in the system are showing. And it's only a matter of time before they give way. All right, Trash Talk fam, that's my take on the Cuba blackout disaster. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is really going on here? And could something like this happen in your neck of the woods? Stay sharp, stay lit, and keep talking that trash.